like the storm of challenges and damaging events in your life is so overwhelming that if you stop to think about it, even for a minute, you'll start crying and never stop? Have you ever felt like Nadia? Have you ever had so much coming at you at once that you felt like the difficult, even negative emotions are creating so much force that you need a release valve just to help you deal with the pressure of it all? Like the tears of a good cry could actually put out the firestorm you're living through. I'm not a warrior. I'm not a tatted badass like Nadia Bowles-Weber, but I think I know what she's talking about. I imagine her, and maybe even myself sometimes, turning on the tears and transforming them from a flood I will drown in to a high-pressure fire hose. No, a water cannon that would not only put out the flames of that storm, but blow it into oblivion. Flood it all out. Turn the tide, and maybe give me a bit of control. The very image of that makes me think of Maya Angelou and what she once called the principle of reverse in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I want to talk about the principle of reverse, but I think it's worth saying that the two women, Nadia Bowles-Weber and Maya Angelou, come from very different places with very different experiences and identities. Maya Angelou was born in 1928 as Marguerite Annie Johnson to working class parents whose tumultuous marriage ended with Maya and her brother being sent to live with their grandparents in Jim Crow, Arkansas during the Depression. Nadia Bowles-Weber was born in 1969, just before the Summer of Love, to solidly middle-class conservative Lutheran parents in Colorado Springs. They sent her to Pepperdine University, where she turned her back on economic and social privilege. One had few choices in life other than to make the most of continually bad situations. And the other had it pretty well and had all of her choices taken away by addiction, fueled by avoidance and rebellion. Both experiences are different from my own. Ultimately, I'm an able-bodied white male who grew up with a certain amount of economic privilege. And the worst addiction I've had to deal with is food. It's been tough at times, but pizza doesn't ruin your life the way drugs and alcohol do. And I've known my own struggles, even though they're very different. I've lost more friends than anyone should lose at the age of 59. I had those times in my life when I have felt like I would never stop crying. I've had the experience more times than I care to remember now of having to say goodbye to practically everyone I love, give up a home I've put so much care into, and schlep halfway across the country just to start all over again. Sometimes I've cried through it, and sometimes, most of the times, I just plow through it, thinking about Maya Angelou's principle of reverse. That term is probably not the best phrase to describe something that isn't a formal theory, but it was her ever-evolving core beliefs about resilience and her perspectives on oppression, privilege, and the complexity of the human spirit. Throughout her career in public life, Maya Angelou talked a lot about turning negatives into positives, fully experiencing the realities of the violence of racism, misogyny, patriarchy, and capitalism in order to benefit from the challenges at the end. The principle of reverse, or whatever you want to call it, requires nothing short of a mind shift act. This act of finding the benefits hidden within the hardships, the strength that comes from being tested, even when you're tested to your limits. It's about making the decision to turn pain into personal power by triumphing over trauma. Not ignoring the trauma, but rather using it to forge your spirit like iron in a crucible. Suffering, according to Ms. Angelo, is precisely what prepares us for success. Resilience, she often famously asserted, is a choice, not a gift given at birth. And how do we cultivate resilience? She said by turning every challenge around, using it to our advantage, using bitterness as fuel for the soul rather than poison, using injustice as an opportunity to practice courage, which she saw as the most important of all virtues, the kind of courage that was the wellspring of the civil rights movement of nonviolent resistance. Or we could turn periods of silence into times of deep reflection and personal growth. I just found out that Maya Angelou didn't speak for about 4 years as a child. She went completely mute after being raped by a friend at the age of 8. Ultimately, Angelou and Nadia Bolz-Weber are saying essentially the same thing. You can't ignore sadness. You can't ignore suffering. You can't resist the tears and the fear and everything that comes with them, especially when it feels like they will never end, especially when it feels like the firestorm of oppression will never end. Here's what I think, though. If you're going to harness bitterness, injustice, and trauma, you must cry through the sadness. Cry like the world is about to end. Cry like the tears are coming up through your heels from the aquifers of the earth itself. But use all that energy to reverse all that energy. Use tears like a fire hose to extinguish the flames of negativity. And to do that, you have to be curious. Because if you aren't curious, negativity will take over. I used to be terrified of my own anger. For the first 40 years of my life, I thought that I would have to fall into the pattern that so many of the men in my family have fallen into for generations. The pattern has been to suppress anger, to push it down, to ignore it, because anger is scary. Anger is destructive. But something happens. Hello. But something happens when you keep pushing something like that down. It can't be contained. The pressure builds, and after a while, it just pops out, usually in the worst possible moment, in an out-of-control rage that does a lot of damage. And the more that happens in your life, the more proof you have that anger is destructive, and the more scary anger becomes. And you just become more justified in your fear of your own anger. At least that was my experience. So I was in my early 40s, having gone through years of therapy before I had the courage to witness my own anger with the same kind of curiosity that guided me through every other challenge in my life. I can still remember the first time I gave curious attention to anger building up in me. I felt my face get hot and my palms get sweaty. And I thought, okay, bring it on. Let's just sit with this and see what it feels like. I paid attention to all the feelings, physical and emotional. I paid attention to my heart rate, my body temperature, the tension in my muscles, especially my tightly clenched fists and my fingernails digging into the palms of my hands. I paid attention to the way My perception of the light in the environment was changing as the reactions to the people around me changed. I felt myself soften. I felt my heart open up, starting with compassion for myself. And it was fascinating. And that act of curious attention stripped the anger of all of its destructive power. It was the first time I'd been able to engage in the principle of reverse with the fear of my own anger. And it wasn't the last time. I haven't been perfect at it. God knows I have failed miserably at times, but for the most part, that curious attention has guided me through some of the biggest challenges in my life, even the ones that make me angry. The times when I've wanted to lash out in rage, and the times when I've wanted to cry till the end of time. I've learned that meeting big feelings with curiosity not only strips them of their negativity, it relieves me of my judgments and my misconceptions. Mostly. Curiosity transforms my fears and tears from a shower that I can't turn off to a hose I can use to put out a fire. We're facing a lot of big changes right now, each in our own lives, in the world, right here in our congregation. Sometimes we're sad, sometimes we're angry, sometimes we're confused and want to lash out. And my hope is that we can all be here with each other, for each other, ready to hand over the tissues for a good cry, or to help handle that fire hose as it extinguishes the flames of destruction. May we be curious with ourselves and with each other. May we be there for each other. Please rise now as you are willing and able, or sit with energy and panache if you prefer.